is from the governor, who's standing behind me here. We have the party chairs, Ray Buckley, Democratic Committee Chair, and Chris Ager on the Republican side. We have some longtime proponents of the primary who have a historical perspective on this. Jim Splain is behind me here. Jim actually wrote the law in 1975 that said that the New Hampshire primary shall go at least 7 days before any similar event. And then Governor Meldrum Thompson signed that bill into law, and his son Tom is with us here today. And then also Cy Gregg is with us. Cy is the son of former Governor Hugh Gregg, who was a really strong proponent of the First of the Nation primary, worked hand in hand with Secretary of State Bill Gardner at the time, and actually wrote a book on why New Hampshire should be first. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, I would certainly do that. Also, my deputies here is Patty Lovejoy and Aaron Hennessy. And I could keep going on with introductions, but I'd better stop there. So hopefully I brought my reading glasses. So rarely is a press announcement conducted in the Hall of Flags, where we are standing today. This space is sacred, and it is a memorial to those New Hampshire soldiers who have fought for freedom and democracy. Behind me and on the walls around the room are the bullet-riddled, shrapnel-torn, and blood-stained flags carried into the major battles and skirmishes of the Civil War. New Hampshire soldiers associated with these flags fought against the worst form of oppression, and they fought to preserve the union of individual states. 125 of those soldiers were African American. The remaining flags and memorial rolls in the hall reflect subsequent wars to protect freedom, democracy, individual rights to vote, and the ability to run for office. This display is a reminder, a daily reminder, and a testament to the character, courage, and sacrifice of New Hampshire citizens. And it is fitting, just a few days after Veterans Day, that these remarks be delivered here. New Hampshire has held the first in the nation presidential primary election for over 100 years. In fact, just last Monday, I attended the funeral of Sybil Dupuy, who was the great-granddaughter of Richard Bullock, a lifelong farmer, and the Democratic state representative from Richmond, New Hampshire, who authored New Hampshire's presidential primary law 110 years ago. New Hampshire became the leadoff primary in 1920 by default, and it has been first ever since. Nearly 50 years ago, former Democratic State Senator Jim Splain, who I just introduced to you, helped protect that tradition by sponsoring the state law requiring the New Hampshire presidential primary be held at least 7 days before any similar event. We did not take the first in the nation primary from anyone, and we will vigorously defend it. The first in the nation status is now being challenged by the Democratic National Committee due to alleged concerns over the lack of racial diversity in the state. Their pundits have claimed that New Hampshire is too white, and by extension, too privileged. A couple of months ago, I heard a former chair of the DNC talk on a talk show asking the voters of New Hampshire if they knew what it was like to live on a dirt road. And the answer to that, of course, is yes, we do. And I would add that you cannot truly appreciate a dirt road until you have experienced one during a New Hampshire mud season. Using racial diversity as a cudgel in an attempt to rearrange the presidential nominating calendar is an ugly precedent. At what point does a state become too old, or too wealthy, or too educated, or too religious to hold an early primary? The truth is, there is no individual state that truly reflects the makeup of America, and no state is more American than any other state. With that said, Diversity is not the real issue at play in this debate. At stake is who gets to determine the nominee of the party. The elites on a national party committee by controlling the nominating calendar, or the voters. New Hampshire believes the voters of each state should decide who they prefer as the nominee to be president, not power brokers in Washington, D.C. That is why Representative Stephen Bullock wrote the New Hampshire presidential primary law in the first place. In New Hampshire, candidates of different ethnic backgrounds, genders, religions, and financial means have done well here, sometimes to the dismay of the national political parties. When the colonists fought and won their independence from Great Britain, New Hampshire crafted a state constitution that predates our federal constitution. At the time, there was a general mistrust of government and a strong sense that the citizens should govern themselves. Our state forefathers created a document that spread the power of government as broadly across the citizen population as possible. That is reflected in the 400-member House of Representatives that we have today, each of which receive a salary of $100 per year. Also, there's a 5-member Executive Council that acts as a check on the governor. All local election officials who run the polling places on election day are elected by their neighbors. And many of those officials are in the room today. There are a lot of town clerks that have joined us. New Hampshire government is designed from the bottom up, not the top down, and our political culture and traditions reflect that. New Hampshire is the antithesis of a national primary or a regional primary or a large state primary, where only the wealthy, well-known, or politically anointed candidates can compete. A small state geographically, with a population of 1.4 million citizens, is the one place where any qualified United States citizen can run for president and have a shot. If you had the childhood dream of growing up to be president of the United States, you can try and make that a reality in New Hampshire. That fact, after all, is the purest form of the American dream. Ballot access is extremely easy by filling out a one-page declaration of candidacy and payment of a $1,000 filing fee. And if a candidate cannot afford the fee, the candidate simply has to collect 100 nomination signatures from around the state and submit that instead. It is far easier for most candidates to run for president in New Hampshire, in the New Hampshire primary, than it is for them to run in their own home state. The state has a receptive and engaged electorate, a trait that has developed and matured over the last 100 years. For a lesser-known candidate, being able to run in a leadoff primary is critical to their potential success. For the most part, they are serious candidates who believe they have something to offer the country, and New Hampshire voters will give them a shot. To bring my remarks full circle, New Hampshire still represents the values and the principles of the soldiers who carried these flags, and the government and political climate we have created here reflects the reason for their sacrifice and courage. In today's society, it seems that we are quick to eliminate traditions and ignore them. But I would like to think that 100 years from now, the people of this country will really be glad that we kept this one. Now, there are 21 candidates who have signed up to run in the Democratic primary, and that's an example of what that ballot is going to look like on Election Day. And then on the Republican side, we have 24. And I think that there are very few states in the country, if any, that have this level of competition in a presidential primary. With that said, the date of the New Hampshire First in the Nation presidential primary will be January 23rd, 2024. Wait, that was almost a big mistake. That date complies with our state statute, requiring our presidential primary to be at least 7 days before any similar event, and it preserves the position of the traditional Iowa caucus. And with that, I would like to ask Jim Splain to come up and make a couple of brief remarks, and then the governor. And because this space is sacred, we're not going to take questions here, but we will move into the visitor center, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, and I'm sure anybody here will be available to the press. So, Jim, would you like to make a few remarks?
Thank you. 50 years is a long time, but I have enough breath, I think, to be able to say a couple of things about the law and about the work of the Secretary of State on this issue. It's one thing to have a law that says New Hampshire will be 7 days or more ahead of any other state. It's another job applying it. Former Secretary of State Bill Gardner did very well at waiting until the last minute, literally, to find out what the other states had done, what the national parties had done in setting their dates. And I'm sure that behind the scenes, following the Gardner tradition, the current Secretary of State, David Scanlan, did the same. By waiting patiently, until he found out exactly when the other states would be holding their scheduled events, Dave Scanlan has today set the date. And that's how we stay first, not just because of law, but people who have the artistry to be able to apply it. Lastly, I think that this election, and I've been involved in every election in one way or another, first as a small pup in 1960, delivering little flyers supporting John F. Kennedy to my neighborhood in Portsmouth. But I think that this election, more than any other that we've had, will be vital, important, and interesting on both sides. The Democratic National Committee failed in trying to stop New Hampshire. We are having a primary with, 21 candidates? And the Republicans are already underway, meeting voters one-on-one, face-to-face, eye-to-eye throughout the state to show their credentials for being president. That's what we're all about. It's going to be interesting in 2024. It's an easy date to forget, because we haven't had it yet. But it's going to be fascinating for all of you. I kind of envy reporters of today to see what's going to be happening, not only in Iowa, not only nationally, but the lead-off primary here in New Hampshire, the first election of the 2024 season. That's a real election where people will be going into polls in the privacy of the booth, not on a postcard, not in a caucus, and voting their choice for President of the United States. Thank you.
Nice job.
Well, I just want to add my quick 2 cents, and the most important part is a big thank you. Big thank you to Dave Scanlan, his amazing staff, of not just keeping a nice tradition. That's not what this is. The First in the Nation primary is something that is earned. And the fact that I think Representative Splain realized that when I was 1 year old in 1975, and had the forethought to codify it into law. There's I think a really important part was a lot of folks across the country will say, what makes New Hampshire so different? We really are a bottom-up state. We really are that state where you don't need name ID, you don't need money, you just need to come out and earn it person to person. And that amazing opportunity that any American can stand up and use New Hampshire as really the doorway for their opportunities and for the rest of the country. That's something that we take very seriously here, and why we hold so true to it. That's why we have such high voter turnout, why we have such high voter participation in both the base parties as well as the independents, right? We have independents that will come out and vote because everyone has that opportunity to meet a candidate and have their voice be heard. You don't see that in many other states, and again, with our high voter turnout and the amazing opportunity, not just for New Hampshire, but for the rest of the country. I always say we're kind of that first filter for the rest of the country, because we appreciate that not every citizen, not every business, not every living room can get filled with presidential candidates. So we take that responsibility on, I think, really seriously. It's not just about the Republicans, it's not just about the Democrats, it's really about everybody coming together and making sure that not just that we do it, but we really do it right. We haven't changed a thing. That's the other thing I want to remind folks. I know the Democrat National Committee tried to take it. We got pushback from folks in Iowa this year and all of that. We haven't changed a thing in New Hampshire. We're going first because our law says so, because we've earned it. We are the ones that are trying to be amazingly consistent. And in all the craziness of this day and age, consistency and integrity in that election process is what everybody is really looking for. So again, just a big thank you to everybody. It was really led, obviously, by Secretary of State Dave. It started by Jim Spillane, led by Dave Scanlan 50 years later. But everybody from all the different parties, the senators, the representatives, Republicans, Democrats, that's a huge win, again, not just for the state of New Hampshire, but for the entire country to be that door of opportunity. And if you didn't get your name on the ballot in 24, there's 330 million Americans. You can come and give it a try in 28, and that door starts right here in New Hampshire. So thanks again, Dave.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Governor.
it.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, I'll be going into the Visitor Center, and if anybody wants to join me in there and ask questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
January 23rd, 2024. That will be the date of this year's first in the nation New Hampshire primary. You've been listening to the New Hampshire Secretary of State Bill Scanlan, along with Governor Sununu and other lawmakers who just announced January 23rd, defending the more than 100-year history of New Hampshire's tradition as first in the nation. Primary election in the country, it often set the tone for elections, and since 1975, New Hampshire has held a law requiring that its primary be held at least 7 days before any other primary in the country. Now, this will come as a blow to President Biden and the Democratic National Committee, who had challenged the date, saying that they believed the population of New Hampshire was not diverse enough to qualify it as first in the nation any longer.